Chapter 7. Loss of the Appleseed.
Don't cry for me, darling. I'll be there to wipe away your tears in the morning. I love you.
Those were the final words he ever spoke to her, and the words that drove her mad. She was a goblin girl, a happy, young, beautiful individual with a heart of gold. She was curious, always wanting to speak with everyone she encountered and learn their stories. She was smart, always reading and learning new skills and studying new ways to make herself useful to the people around her. And more than anything, she was passionate. Passionate about culture, art, knowledge, and ideas. And, of course, romance. And that's how she met him. As if in a fairy tale, one particular windy day had her out and about the city square. She wore a scarf around her neck, a purple wool thing she had gotten from the local tailor. It blew off her neck, dancing in the breeze as she chased after it. When she found the thing, she also found the most handsome individual she had ever laid eyes on. A human male with short, messy brown hair and brown eyes that she immediately found herself lost in. He had a strong stature and wore simple leather armor on his body. To most, he would be just some adventurer. But to her, he was perfect. He returned the scarf to her, and they stood there, both completely breathtaken by the other. Suddenly, her life had an entirely new meaning. All she wanted was to be by this human's side. Forever. The two wandered around the city together that day, talking and learning about the other. He was a traveler, a hunter and mercenary. He had never planned on settling down and leaving that life. That was, until he saw her. The coming years were full of joy and bliss, with the goblin and human quickly wed to one another. The city knew of them as the happiest couple they had ever seen, always laughing and smiling when they were together. He was the light in her darkness, the shelter in her storms, and she couldn't imagine her life without him anymore. That was until the disease. A harsh winter brought with it the sting of a new plague. While she was fortunate herself to never catch such a thing, some of the city folk were less lucky. Her love was one such fate. 4 months she was glued to his side, fetching him a cold cloth when he felt feverish, giving him medicine when he coughed, running to the market and spending all their savings on medicines and salves and spells from the local priesthood. Nothing she did ever seemed to make a difference. Then one day, he fell asleep, and he never woke up.
Don't cry for me, darling. I'll be there to wipe away your tears in the morning. I love you.
Those final words, they taunted her. He couldn't truly be gone, could he? They were supposed to be together, for eternity and even then on. But now he was just gone. She buried his body in the backyard, the scarf they met over draped on his headstone. She sat herself in front of his gravesite, unable to hold back her tears as she wept onto the ground. No one left to wipe her tears away. Why did he have to die? Why did she have to be left alone? Why couldn't it be her instead? How come when death happens, that's it? Could she ever bring him back? These questions never left her mind, constantly calling her and crying out in her head. This couldn't be it. He couldn't be gone. She needed to bring him back. She was gonna bring him back. And the next year, she went mad. Her reputation as the heart of the city quickly vanished. All she would talk about was him. All she would think about was him. All she wanted was him. And she told everyone she encountered that one way or another, he would be reunited with her. In the deepest depths of the city housed a library. A cold, drab, crumbling building where a peculiar old wizard worked. There, she found books of rituals, rites and chants in order to command and summon creatures not of this world. It seemed insane, relying on creepy books such as this. But she needed him to come back to her. She returned to her home and spent the coming weeks gathering what she needed for the ritual. First, a dagger with a ruby encrusted in the hilt. Second was the deadly nightshade berries. Third was a single horn, taken from any wild animal she herself had slaughtered. Fourth, any item once touched by her love. She thought it strangely beautiful to use the scarf he had first touched when they met. And finally, trigger warning for blood and gore coming up. I'll give you a second if you wish to leave. Finally, enough blood from her own body to form the circle and spill on the items to summon the beast. She slashed at her palm, blood staining the scarf as she began to utter the words. Reaper of dark, reaper of one's flesh and skin, free me now of this most vile sin. Death and life separate what once was whole, my life now devoid of my love's soul. Give me your blessing so I can finally see and return him unto me. She immediately fell back as smoke and shadow began to twist around the circle and enshroud her like a tornado. The blood from the objects began to take form, shaping together a skeletal being with a long gray beard and hollow eyes. His visage was friendlier than she anticipated. He approached her, weariness in his bones and confusion in his words.
Why have you summoned the one who rules over death?
Death itself, the Grim Reaper. She had finally done it. All her pining, all her waiting, she'd finally had a chance. Anything she could do to bring him back to her. There was only one way that she knew of, a terrible art, only available to those who bargained with death itself. Necromancy. I want him back, she spoke, voice shaking with fear and pain. She couldn't be scared. She had to be confident. I need him back. The Reaper surprised her, seeming oddly concerned for her.
Know that the order of life cannot be defied without paying a terrible price. Know that should you choose this path, you and your lover will suffer a fate far worse than death. and that the gates of paradise will forever be closed to you both. Knowing this, do you still choose this path?
She was certain. The cost did not matter to her. She needed him back. Him returning to her was all she had thought of since his passing.
To become a necromancer is to forego your humanity. Your soul will belong to me, and you and him both will be shells of your former selves. This is not a decision to take lightly.
There was nothing the Reaper could say to sway her. Her mind was already made up long before summoning him.
I will not speak more if you have made your choice. But do know that you will be changed. Your body and soul torn from you in agony. He will be returned to you, but neither one of you will be able to be as you once were.
If it meant having him back, being able to even see him, she didn't care what state they both were in. She would endure 1,000,000 years of torment, damnation far greater than any level of hell she could even fathom, if it meant even looking upon his face again. The Reaper shook his head. He wished desperately that she had reconsidered. She was not the first foolish mortal to choose this path, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. With a boom of a thunderous sound, in his hands formed a scythe made entirely of bone, with gnarled tendrils of blackened mist around the blade.
The price must be paid.
All of a sudden, the goblin felt her entire being writhe against her. She screamed in agony as her eyes began to cry tears of black and blood. Her face began to contort as her skin burned against her. Her left eye fell from its socket, drooping down to the floor. A sharp, searing pain wrecked her flesh as she watched the center of the Reaper's scythe form a face much like her own, with drops of her own blood crawling up the hilt. Her hands twisted, fingers becoming elongated into claw-like shapes. She felt as her skin from her face began to melt from a corrosive pain, leaving only bone and the lack of sight from one eye in its wake. When the pain finally stopped, the Reaper disappeared. Only the scythe remained in its place. She grabbed the thing without hesitation and felt its power thrum through her. With a swipe of this, she knew she could bring him back. She ran towards the gravesite, digging with dangerous ferocity that caused her already mangled fingers to bleed further, until she found his coffin and unearthed it to see his corpse one final time. Feeling the bony blade within her gnarled fingers, she swiped at his body. Purple tendrils erupted from the blade, prying at his flesh and reaching deep within his heart. In an instant, his eyes awoke, staring back at her. She had done it. Finally, he was back to her. Finally, they were reunited. She looked at him and he at her, but she didn't feel excited. She didn't feel anything. Why didn't she feel something? Was this the price of her humanity? Was this the price of her life? She could see him, kiss him, hug him, be with him. But she felt nothing. No elation, no joy, not even anger at the fact that she didn't feel anything. All she felt was the newfound power of her necromancy course through her being. He couldn't speak to her. He spoke in grunts, a simple undead with no thoughts or feelings. and she felt very similarly. All this for nothing. Their lives, their souls, their humanity, all they were now were husks, nothing but shells of their former selves, just as the Reaper had warned. Nowadays, the half-goblin, half-skeleton monstrosity lurks in the shadows, reaping the souls and restoring the dead whenever it is of use to her. But Death's shadow constantly looms over her and reminds her that she chose this existence. And now, there's no going back.